Hey everyone, this is Cami Westall with a little chapter summary for Chapter 2, which is entitled Colonial Outposts. So just reviewing some of the material that's included to give you a little bit of variety from just reading the text. What this chapter is really focusing on is these European encounters with the New World, because after Columbus, there we go, sailed first in 1492. He made 4 different voyages, but and he never made it to what's known as the United States now, but he gets to North America and to the coast of South America. Europeans initially thought this was Asia, and then they were concentrating, when they determined that it was a new world, on saying, okay, well, is it worth exploring, or can we get through this new world to get to Asia? So this, it's known as the New World from the European standpoint, because they didn't know that North and South America were there. They were expecting to get to Asia. So it goes through some of the explorations that are well known, notes that other people kind of come. John Cabot had sailed for England, even though, like Columbus, he was originally from the city of Genoa, which is a kind of a fishing city in Italy. But people are looking for new ways to get to Asia, to find faster ways there, to find more money, which is ultimately one of the major driving factors. And then once they start to process that they can't get through North America very easily, people start establishing more outposts, and the French are involved initially. Mentions that on page 36, that Jacques Cartier, so not Jacques Cartier as we might say in South Carolina, but travels through Canada trying to find a way through that geographic barrier. And the French will then later set up some outposts that will be discussed in this chapter. So they're trying to take advantage of the technology and the new knowledge that's out there, and then the Spanish come along as well, following Columbus's earlier routes and sort of settling in the Caribbean area. And then it's the Spanish who set up what becomes the oldest permanent settlement in what's now the United States. So St. Augustine, that it mentions on page 37, established in 1565. So that's one of those key things, that long before Charleston or Boston or Jamestown, the Spanish had a permanent presence in what becomes the United States. So now the Spanish are going to continue to sort of explore the region of the southern United States into Mexico, into Central America and South America, and the French are a little bit farther up north. So then it sort of gets into New France. Here's a map kind of showing that general geographic area. This part where the mouse is moving is sort of upstate New York. And that's where it mentions the 5 nations, that League of Native Americans, because even though this was territory that the Europeans didn't know about, there were still inhabitants, the Native Americans. And so love-hate relationships going on. Both sides try to use the other to their advantage. Sometimes they're going to get along well, sometimes they won't. But the French, as they explore this area up here, they're really seeking these beaver pelts. Beaver pelts were used to make all kinds of hats. They're still used for hats today. A lot of times you see the top hats that people might wear to the opera or something like that. I'm sure all you guys bust out your top hat or derby hat every day. But these are still usually made out of beaver fur. It's not just some polyester material if you buy a real one. So the beaver pelts were in major high demand. And as they're going through Native American territory, the natives want things from the Europeans, like weapons and guns. And so sometimes, again, they'll get along. Sometimes they'll fight against one another. Sometimes the natives are fighting amongst one another, as it mentions those struggles as well. And so then they can, it's to their advantage to try to side with the Europeans. But what the French do, and this will be important later as we get to conflicts where the natives usually side with the French instead of the English once the English finally get involved. The French, as it discusses, really makes more efforts to appease the natives. They will adopt more Native American customs. They aren't quite as interested in settling down permanently in one place as they are going to other places, trying to find these beaver pelts. And there certainly are times where they will send over people to try to transform and change the natives, but there will be Native Americans who marry French people. So there's a little bit more of a meshing of cultures among the French, and the French will end up being slightly more respected as the European power among many of the Native Americans in that northern region of what's now Canada and New England, the northernmost United States. Before it gets into New Netherland, it mentions on page 44 this idea of mercantilism, and that becomes a major driving force. This idea, this economic concept that there's only a certain amount of wealth in the world, gold and silver, wealth can't be created. Like today you hear with a company like Google can create new wealth and new jobs. But what these countries believe at the time, really up until the later 1700s, is that there's only X amount of wealth. And so you kind of constantly are at warfare with one another, because if you gain wealth, that automatically means your counterparts have lost it. And so you don't want, as a country, to allow, if you're New Netherland or if you're Spain or England, you don't want to allow France to gain an advantage. France doesn't want to allow Spain or the Netherlands or England to gain an advantage, because that means if another country gains the advantage, you automatically lose an advantage. So that you're trying to secure as much wealth as you possibly can, and it's going to lead to a lot of warfare. And that means as the French and Spanish are getting settled, other countries want to be involved as well. So the Dutch come in, set up New Netherland and what's largely New York now, and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, a lot of things named for them up there. Talks about the slavery situation in New England, the city that's modern day New York, New Amsterdam. This is an area that later on, after Charleston, will have the highest slave population in the United States. So the Dutch are bringing in slaves, but it talks about a lot of ethnic diversity in the Netherlands. The Netherlands tend to be more accepting of other people. It mentions Peter Stuyvesant, our famous leader there of New Netherland or New Amsterdam, that will ultimately fail and be taken over by the English. But there's still a good many things named up there, like the Hudson River for Henry Hudson, one of their explorers. So we've got them kind of right below the French. Talks about their policies with Native Americans before New Netherland really faces some major economic struggles. The famous Beaver Wars, again involving the Five Nations. So the Native Americans and their influence, certainly not anything that can be overlooked very well as these areas are developing in the New World. And then it gets finally involved in England. What throws a lot of people off when we talk about England, looking at this map here, is it's not the whole island. England is one country in the United Kingdom, which the UK takes up Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, which is shadowed here. The British Isles include Ireland, so you get a complicated kind of situation here. But England, which will later be united into the UK, but this whole island with Scotland and Wales is known as Britain. Said that like a nice southerner. So they will be close to uniting here, but haven't quite yet. but I'm pretty bad about interchanging Britain, which is technically the whole island there on the right, with England, which is technically one of 3 countries on the island, but they end up uniting their throne during the early portions of this course. Anyway, England finally has to get involved. They've been fighting back and forth with Spain, largely over religion, because there's been a lot of religious turbulence at this time due to the Protestant Reformation. England has become Protestant, or we have the Anglican Church there, the Church of England, which is different from the Catholic Church. But all these run-ins, it mentioned Sir Francis Drake from England, trying to defeat the Spanish. In 1588, you have the famous Spanish Armada. It's more than just a giant Nissan automobile. The Armada was this huge attempted invasion by Spain, which is just below France over here on the right-hand side. The English then kind of brutally try to take over Ireland before they set up an outpost in Roanoke. If anybody grew up in North Carolina like me, you spend your entire 4th grade year talking about absolutely nothing except Roanoke. But this island here in the Outer Banks, so in the on the east coast of North Carolina, where Sir Walter Raleigh has been involved, Raleigh, North Carolina, named after him, in setting up this new colony here. The captain is delayed in coming back after they've set up again after some problems the first time, and then they're gone. The colony is going to be abandoned, known as lost. And this is a major problem for Queen Elizabeth I, because she said, okay, we can't exactly recruit people when we to a colony when we say, well, we have no idea what happened to the other people if they went to settle with Native Americans, or if they, you know, here it says on page 55 that it was abandoned and the people left. Very, very likely that's happened. It's not fully confirmed. It could have been some sort of awful hurricane that forced them to go away, that could have killed people. It could have been a Native American attack. There is some evidence that there were Native Americans with blue eyes seen about 30 years after this, so they may have settled with other local Native Americans. But still, Queen Elizabeth says, well, we're not going to do anything more on my watch while I'm on the throne. So it's going to be a few more years before the English get another chance at settling the colony, and that will be after Queen Elizabeth's death. So that's just a brief overview again of what's going on in chapter 2 as things are getting busy with all these countries saying, okay, here's this new land. We can't let other countries get an advantage over us because of what's that special economic theory word? Wait for it. Meaning mercantilism. Good job. I'm sure everybody got that. But because of mercantilism, they're not going to allow their rival countries to gain an advantage. Native Americans are trying to deal with all of this. We have slavery being introduced in the 1600s. So lots going on, but that's our brief overview for chapter 2.